Hi, I'm the girl assigned to you by local authorities, alien girl says, shyly waving. 3 firm knocks echoed through the spacious living quarters. Ashton McAllister looked up from the holographic star map he had been studying, his brow furrowed. He wasn't expecting any visitors at this late hour. Rising from his chair, the tall, muscular human strode to the door, the panels of his open white armor suit shifting over his chiseled chest and abs. He ran a hand through his tousled blonde hair and straightened his beard as he reached for the access panel. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing an unexpected sight. Standing in the hallway was a stunningly beautiful humanoid alien woman. She had luminous violet skin, long, silky white hair that cascaded down her back, and captivating silver eyes flecked with gold. Her curvaceous figure was barely contained by a revealing white bodysuit with a plunging neckline, cutouts at the hips and no sleeves. A delicate white choker encircled her slender neck, and matching cuffs adorned her wrists. "Hi, I'm Rolana, the girl assigned to you by the local authorities," she announced brightly, giving him a shy little wave and a dazzling smile. Her melodic voice held a charming accent he couldn't quite place. Ashton stared at her, momentarily dumbfounded by this gorgeous alien female who had appeared out of nowhere at his doorstep. He shook his head to regain his composure. "I'm sorry, assigned to me? I think there must be some mistake or odd," he said, his deep voice colored with confusion. "I didn't request anyone to be assigned to me. And assigned for what purpose exactly?" Rylana bit her plump bottom lip and glanced down, her long lashes fluttering. "Well, you see, in an effort to help with population growth, the Delaxian administration has implemented a new initiative. They are assigning single Delaxian females to unattached males as part of a social progress program. We are meant to be your companions, and perhaps, if things go well, even more than that." She trailed off, a violet blush spreading across her smooth cheeks as she peeked up at him through her lashes. The implication of her words hung in the air between them. Ashton's eyebrows shot up as realization dawned. He rubbed the back of his neck, at a loss for words. As a human peacekeeper stationed on the Delaxian homeworld, he was used to cultural differences, but this was beyond anything he had encountered before. "I appreciate the sentiment, but on Earth we don't assign romantic partners like this," he explained gently, not wanting to offend her. "Couples usually get together of their own free will, when there's a mutual attraction and compatibility." Rylana nodded, her expression crestfallen. "I understand. It's just that, well, now that I've been assigned to you, I don't really have anywhere else to go." She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, looking uncertain and vulnerable. Ashton's heart went out to her. It wasn't her fault she had been thrust into this awkward situation. And what kind of man would he be if he turned away a female in need of help? He sighed and stepped back from the doorway. "Why don't you come inside and we can talk more about this unusual predicament we find ourselves in? I'm sure we can figure something out." Rylana's face lit up with a relieved smile. "Thank you so much. I promise I won't be any trouble." She picked up a small travel case by her feet that Ashton hadn't noticed before and glided past him into his quarters. As she brushed by, he caught a tantalizing whiff of her sweet floral scent. He swallowed hard, trying to ignore the immediate spark of attraction that zipped through him at her nearness. "Get a hold of yourself, McAllister." He chastised himself mentally, following her inside and allowing the door to swish shut behind them. "This is a totally inappropriate situation. You need to keep things professional, regardless of how beautiful and alluring she is." Rylana looked around his orderly living space with open curiosity, setting her bag down near the plush gray couch. Ashton noticed how her bodysuit clung to her every curve as she moved, leaving little to the imagination. He cleared his throat. "Can I get you something to drink?" "I have water, juice, or I could make some tea." "Some juice would be lovely, thank you," she replied with a gracious smile, perching herself on the edge of the sofa and crossing her long, shapely legs. Ashton forced his gaze away from her enticing figure and hurried to the kitchen nook, grateful for the distraction. He took a couple of deep breaths as he retrieved 2 glasses and poured some chilled lunar berry juice from the refrigeration unit. Okay, first things first. He needed to establish some ground rules and boundaries with his lovely alien house guest. Make it clear that he wasn't expecting or demanding anything inappropriate from her. They would keep things strictly platonic between them. Nodding to himself, he carried the glasses back into the living area, handing one to Rylana. His fingers brushed against hers as she took it from him. A tingle raced up his arm at the brief contact, and he quickly withdrew his hand. "So, tell me more about this program you volunteered for," he said, taking a seat in an armchair across from her and focusing his gaze on her face. "I'd like to understand your situation better." Rilana took a sip of her juice and then set the glass on the low table in front of her. She laced her slender fingers together in her lap. "Of course. As you may know, the Dialoxian population has been in decline for the past few decades due to a genetic mutation that has impacted our fertility," she began to explain, her tone somber. "The administration has been increasingly worried about the long-term survival of our species." Ashton nodded. He had heard about the population crisis the Dialoxians were facing. It was one of the reasons the Intergalactic Alliance had stationed peacekeepers like him on their planet to provide aid and support during this challenging time. To try to combat this issue, they came up with the idea for this social progress program, Rilana continued. Single Dialoxian women of childbearing age like myself were encouraged to volunteer. We undergo compatibility testing and then are assigned to a suitable male partner, regardless of species. The hope is that we will form a deep connection with our assigned mate, and eventually, she trailed off, her cheeks darkening to a deeper shade of violet. She glanced away shyly. "Eventually produce offspring together?" Ashton finished for her, understanding dawning. I see." He scrubbed a hand over his face, his mind whirling. This was an even more complicated situation than he had initially realized. "Forgive me if this is too forward," Rilana said quietly, peeking up at him. "I know this must come as quite a shock to you. And please don't feel any pressure or obligation towards me. The last thing I want to do is make you uncomfortable in your own home." She looked so earnest and sincere, her silver eyes wide and pleading. Ashton's heart softened further towards her. She truly was in a difficult position, caught between her sense of duty to her people and the awkwardness of being assigned to a total stranger. "You haven't made me uncomfortable," he assured her gently. "Surprised, yes, but not uncomfortable. I'm just trying to wrap my head around all of this." Rilana visibly relaxed, a relieved smile curving her full lips. "I'm so glad. You've been very kind and understanding about this unusual turn of events." Ashton returned her smile, unable to resist the warmth and friendliness she radiated. "I'll do my best to help you navigate this situation. We can take things slow, get to know each other as friends first. There's no need to rush into anything. I have a spare bedroom you can stay in for now." "Thank you, Ashton," she said softly, her eyes shining with gratitude. "I feel very fortunate that the authorities chose to assign me to someone as considerate and honorable as you." A pleased flush heated the back of Ashton's neck at her praise, but he tried not to let it go to his head. He was just doing what any decent being would do in these circumstances. Still, as he showed Rilana to the guest room and helped her get settled, he couldn't deny the growing sense of protectiveness and affection he felt towards this lovely alien female who had unexpectedly entered his life. Only time would tell what would develop between them. But one thing was for certain, his life had just gotten a whole lot more interesting and complicated. As Rilana gave him a shy smile over her shoulder before closing the bedroom door, Ashton had a feeling he was in for quite an adventure. Over the next few days, Ashton and Rilana fell into a comfortable routine together. In the mornings, Ashton would head off to work at the Peacekeeper Command Center, while Rilana explored his apartment, fascinated by the unfamiliar human gadgets and amenities. In the evenings, Ashton introduced her to Earth cuisine, enjoying the way her eyes would light up in delight at each new flavor. They spent hours talking, sharing stories about their vastly different worlds and cultures. Rilana was endlessly curious, peppering him with questions about human customs and his own past. Ashton found himself growing more and more charmed by her sweet nature, quick mind, and playful sense of humor. It was becoming harder to ignore the simmering attraction between them, the electricity that seemed to crackle in the air whenever they were in close proximity. He had to keep reminding himself to maintain a respectful distance, to not let his gaze linger too long on her tempting curves or full, kissable lips. She wasn't just some casual fling. She had been placed in his care, and he needed to treat her honorably. One evening, Ashton decided it was time to introduce Rilana to his friends and coworkers. He thought it would be good for her to socialize with others besides just him, help her feel more at home on dialogues. "I was thinking we could go out tonight, if you're up for it," he mentioned casually over dinner, spearing a bite of seasoned veggie protein. Some friends of mine invited us to join them at a popular lounge. The Nebula. It would be a chance for you to meet new people, experience more of the city. Rilana perked up, her eyes sparkling with excitement. That sounds wonderful. I'd love to meet your friends and see more of this fascinating place. Ashton grinned, pleased by her enthusiasm. Great. It's a bit of a high-end spot, so feel free to dress up if you'd like. Not that you need any help in the looks department. He gave her an admiring wink before he could stop himself. A pretty blush stained her cheeks as she ducked her head shyly. Thank you. I'll do my best to look presentable for your friends. A couple hours later, Ashton was adjusting the cuffs of his black dress shirt when he heard Rylana's bedroom door open. He glanced up and promptly forgot how to breathe. She stood there in a slinky, shimmering gold dress that hugged every mouth-watering curve before flaring out mid-thigh into a flirty skirt. The plunging neckline revealed an enticing expanse of smooth violet cleavage. Her white hair was swept up into an elegant twist, adorned with glittering pins. Smoky eyeshadow made her silver eyes pop, and her lips were painted a glossy nude. How do I look? She asked, doing a little twirl. The skirt flared up, giving him a tantalizing peek of toned violet thighs. Ashton swallowed hard, his mouth gone bone dry. You look absolutely stunning, he managed hoarsely. Breathtaking, gorgeous, like every fantasy come to life. Rilana beamed at him, clearly thrilled by his reaction. Thank you. You look very handsome as well. Her gaze swept appreciatively over his black dress, shirt, and slacks, the way they clung to his muscular frame. Heat licked through Ashton, and he had to tear his eyes away before he did something rash, like pull her into his arms and show her just how good he thought she looked. We should get going, he said gruffly. Don't want to keep the others waiting. The Nebula was only a short hover cab ride away. The upscale lounge was already packed when they arrived, beings of all species mingling beneath the swirling, colorful lights. Holographic galaxies drifted overhead, casting an ethereal glow over the space. Ashton spotted his friends at a table near the bar and led Rylana over with a gentle hand on the small of her back. He tried to ignore the tingle that raced through him at the feel of her warm, silky skin beneath his fingertips. Hey guys, I'd like you to meet someone special. He greeted the group with a smile, urging Rilana forward. This is Rilana, my new roommate. Rilana, these are some of my friends and coworkers. Axel, Rick, Jace, and Varen. The four males, a Vorian, 2 humans, and a Lyraxian, looked up and immediately went slack-jawed at the sight of the lovely Diloxian female. Well, hello there, beautiful. Axel, the teal-skinned Vorian, recovered first with a flirtatious grin. Aren't you just a vision? Where has Ashton been hiding you? Rylana offered a friendly smile, but Ashton didn't miss the way she subtly shifted closer to him. It's a pleasure to meet you all. Ashton has told me so much about you. And yet he neglected to mention you, Rick said, throwing Ashton a look of mock affront. For shame, my friend. Keeping such a stunning creature all to yourself. Jace elbowed Rick. Don't be a creep, man. I'm sure there's a perfectly reasonable explanation. Right, Ashton? Ashton cleared his throat, suddenly feeling awkward. He hadn't really thought through how he was going to explain Rylana's presence to his friends. Well, it's a bit of an unusual situation, he began, rubbing the back of his neck. You see, Rylana is part of this Diloxian program. I volunteered to be placed with a suitable male to help with our population crisis. Rylana interjected smoothly, laying a hand on Ashton's arm and smiling up at him. And I was lucky enough to be assigned to Ashton. He's been nothing but welcoming and kind. Ashton blinked down at her, surprised and a bit impressed by her quick thinking. It was the truth, just without all the complicated details. His friends exchanged glances, ranging from envious to speculative. Well, good on you, Ashton, Varen said, raising his glass in a toast. Never thought I'd see the day when you'd let a female move in with you, but I suppose there's a first time for everything. Ashton forced a chuckle, even as an odd feeling twisted in his gut. He knew his friends were just joking around, but he didn't like the way they were looking at Rilana, like she was a piece of meat to be devoured. Seeming to sense his discomfort, Rilana gave his arm a reassuring squeeze. Ashton has been a perfect gentleman. I couldn't ask for a better living companion during my time here, she said firmly, a note of affection in her voice. Warmth bloomed in Ashton's chest at her word, chasing away the unpleasant sensation. She always seemed to know just what to say to put him at ease. "And I couldn't ask for better company," he replied softly, covering her hand with his own and sharing a meaningful look with her. The moment was broken by Axel making a gagging noise. "Ugh, get a room, you two. Your sweetness is giving me cavities." "Like you're one to talk," Rick scoffed. "I've seen you in action, remember? You're even worse when you—" "Okay," Jace interrupted loudly. "I think it's time for another round. Ashton, Rylana, what can I get you to drink?" The rest of the evening passed pleasantly enough, the group making easy conversation and slowly getting to know Rylana. Ashton was proud of the way she charmed them all with her quick wit and engaging stories. Still, he couldn't help the flare of irritation every time one of his friends paid her a compliment that veered just a little too close to flirtatious, or let their gaze linger a bit too long on her cleavage. He found himself putting a possessive arm around her waist, or touching her in little ways just to make it clear that she was here with him. It was ridiculous, he knew. Rylana wasn't actually his, and even if she was her own person, not some object for him to jealously guard. But he couldn't seem to override the primitive part of his brain that wanted to announce mine and drag her away from prying eyes. By the time they said their goodbyes and caught a cab back to the apartment, Ashton was wound tighter than a coiled spring. The ride was charged with a tension that hadn't been there on the way to the lounge, both hyper-aware of each other in the close confines of the vehicle. Rylana kept sneaking little glances at him from beneath her lashes. Her cheeks flushed a fetching shade of lavender. Ashton flexed his hands against his thighs, fighting the urge to reach out and pull her into his lap, to finally take what he'd been aching for all night. When they finally reached the apartment, Ashton gentlemanly helped Rylana out of the cab, his large hand engulfing her smaller one. Neither let go even after she was steady on her feet, the simple contact sending sparks zinging between them. They walked to the door, hands linked, a weighted silence stretching taut. Ashton keyed in the code and the door slid open. Rylana made a step inside, but Ashton tugged her back around to face him. "Rylana," he began, his voice low and rough with carefully restrained need. "I just wanted to say, you were amazing tonight. Watching you charm my friends, seeing how effortlessly you put them at ease. I felt so proud to have you by my side." Her eyes widened, her lips parting on a soft inhale. "Ashton, thank you. That means so much to me." Slowly giving her time to pull away, Ashton reached up to cup her cheek, stroking his thumb over the silken skin. "I hated the way they looked at you, though," he confessed quietly. "Like they wanted to steal you away from me. It took everything I had not to punch Axel for some of his comments." Rylana leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed. "You don't have to worry about that," she breathed. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm right where I want to be." Ashton groaned low in his throat, the last threads of his control snapping. Fisting his other hand in her hair, he slanted his mouth over hers in a searing kiss that was all pent-up hunger and desperation. Rylana made a startled noise before melting against him, her lips parting to allow him to deepen the kiss. She tasted like honey and spice, her flavor exploding across his senses and making him dizzy with want. He walked her backwards into the apartment, kicking the door shut behind them. His hands roamed greedily over her lush curves as he backed her against the wall, swallowing her needy whimpers. She clutched at his shoulders, arching into him as he trailed open-mouthed kisses down the elegant column of her throat. "Ashton," she panted, her nails digging deliciously into his skin through his shirt. "Please." With a low growl, Ashton hoisted her up, encouraging her to wrap her legs around his waist as he ground himself against her core. Even through their clothes, he could feel her heat, her desire for him. It would be so easy to strip her bare, to bury himself in her welcoming arms and lose himself in her sweet kisses. But as much as he ached to claim her, to make her his in every way, he couldn't. Not like this. Not when she'd had no choice but to be here. Somehow he found the strength to gentle his kisses, to slow the desperate rocking of their hips. Carefully, he set her back on her feet, steadying her when she wobbled. "I'm sorry," he rasped, resting his forehead against hers as he tried to catch his breath. "I shouldn't have done that. I don't want you to think that I expect that you owe me." "Shh." Rylana laid a finger against his lips, her silver eyes soft and understanding. "You have nothing to apologize for. I wanted that just as much as you did." Ashton searched her gaze, looking for any hint of uncertainty or hesitation. All he found was warmth, affection, and banked desire. I care for you, Rylana, he said, his heart in his throat. More than I probably should, given the circumstances. And I want you. Heavens do, I want you. But I need to know that you want this too, that you want me. Not because you feel obligated, but because it's what your heart desires. Rylana cupped his face in her small hands, her touch infinitely tender. Oh, Ashton, my heart has been yours since the moment you opened your door to me. Everything I feel for you. It's real. It's the truest thing I've ever known. Joy and relief crashed through Ashton, stealing his breath. He gathered her close, burying his face in her hair and just breathing her in. We'll take this slow, he promised hoarsely. I want to do this right. You deserve to be courted, treasured, loved. And I will be, she said with quiet, certainly, nuzzling into his throat, because I have you. They stayed like that for a long moment, just holding each other close. When they finally pulled back, Ashton brushed a tender kiss to her forehead. It's late. We should probably get some sleep, he said reluctantly, everything in him wanting to never let her go. Rylana nodded, stifling a yawn behind her hand. You're right, I am pretty tired. She stepped out of his arms, instantly missing his warmth. Good night, Ashton. Good night, sweetheart, he murmured, watching her walk towards her room with a pang of longing. She paused in the doorway, looking back at him with a shy smile. For the record, you're right where I want to be too. Then she slipped inside, the door closing behind her with a soft snick. Ashton stood there for a long moment, a dopey grin on his face. He felt lighter than he had in years, buoyed by the knowledge that this amazing female wanted him just as much as he wanted her. Whatever challenges or obstacles lay ahead of them, he knew they would face them together. And together, he had a feeling they just might be unstoppable. Ashton was a bundle of nerves as he checked his appearance in the mirror for the 12th time. He wanted everything to be perfect for his first official date with Rylana. After their charged encounter a few nights ago, they had taken things slow, sharing tender kisses and innocent touches, but not letting it progress further. Ashton was determined to court Rylana properly, to show her how much he cherished her. He had agonized over the details of their date, wanting it to be romantic and memorable. He'd finally settled on taking her to the botanical gardens for a picnic lunch, followed by a couple's paint class where they could create a masterpiece together. A soft knock sounded at the door, and Ashton's heart leaped into his throat. Come in, he called, turning to face the door. The door slid open and Rylana stepped inside, a shy smile on her face. Ashton's breath caught. She looked like a dream in a flowing, off-the-shoulder sundress in a soft lavender hue that complemented her violet skin. Her white hair was left loose in gentle waves, and she wore minimal makeup, allowing her natural beauty to shine through. You look beautiful, Ashton said hoarsely, drinking her in. A pretty blush stained her cheeks. Thank you. You look very handsome yourself. Ashton glanced down at his simple white button-down shirt and khaki pants. He felt underdressed next to her ethereal loveliness. Shaking off his insecurity, he stepped forward and took her hand, raising it to his lips for a gentle kiss. Are you ready for our date? Rylana nodded, her eyes sparkling with excitement. I can't wait to see what you have planned. Hand in hand, they left the apartment and caught a hover cab to the botanical gardens. Ashton had arranged for a private picnic spot in a secluded glade, surrounded by fragrant blooms and a babbling brook. He spread out a soft blanket and began unpacking the basket he had prepared, laying out a variety of finger foods, fresh fruits, and a chilled bottle of sparkling cider. Oh, Ashton, this is wonderful, Rylana breathed, taking in the romantic setting. Pride and pleasure suffused him at her obvious delight. I'm glad you like it. I wanted our first date to be special. They settled on the blanket and began to eat, feeding each other bites between sips of cider. The food was delicious, but Ashton barely tasted it, too enraptured by the female beside him. The way the dappled sunlight played over her hair, the musical sound of her laughter, the brush of her fingers against his as she handed him a ripe berry. He could have happily stayed in that glade forever, lost in the magic of her presence. But eventually the food was gone, and it was time to move on to the next part of their date. Ashton packed up the remains of their picnic and took Rylana's hand as they strolled through the gardens towards the Arts and Crafts Center. The air was perfumed with the heady scent of 1,000 alien blooms, and the walkways were lined with burbling fountains and whimsical topiaries. I didn't know a place like this existed in the city, Raylana said wonderingly. It's like a hidden paradise. It's one of my favorite places to come when I need a break from the bustle of city life, Ashton told her. A little piece of nature amidst the steel and chrome. Thank you for sharing it with me, she said softly, squeezing his hand. Ashton lifted their joined hands and brushed a kiss across her knuckles. Thank you for being here with me. They shared a long look filled with tender emotion, the rest of the world fading away until it was just the two of them. Ashton was just lowering his head, intent on capturing her lips with his, when a loud crash shattered the tranquil atmosphere. Ashton whipped around, instinctively pushing Raylana behind him as he scanned for the source of the noise. There, by the large ornamental fountain, a Vertian male was sprawled on the ground, the remains of an easel scattered around him. A human woman stood over him, her hands on her hips and a scowl on her face. I told you to watch where you were going, the woman snapped. You just ruined my painting. It was an accident, the Vorian protested, struggling to his feet. His clothes were soaked from his tumble into the fountain, and he had splotches of brightly colored paint splattered across his teal skin. I tripped. Over your own 2 feet, you clumsy oaf, the woman sneered. The Vorian's face darkened with anger and embarrassment. He opened his mouth, no doubt to deliver a blistering retort, but Ashton quickly intervened. Hey now, let's all calm down, he said, stepping forward with his hands raised in a placating gesture. I'm sure this was just an unfortunate mishap. There's no need for things to escalate. The woman turned her glare on Ashton. Stay out of this, human. This is between me and the walking disaster here. Ashton gritted his teeth at her rudeness, but kept his tone even. I understand that you're upset about your painting, ma'am, but accidents happen. I'm sure if we all take a breath and talk this out calmly, we can come to a resolution. The Vorian shot Ashton a grateful look. The woman looked like she wanted to argue, but after a tense moment, she huffed and crossed her arms. Fine. Talk. Relieved, Ashton turned to the Vorian. Sir, I think it would go a long way if you apologized to the lady for the accident and offered to replace her damaged supplies. The Vorian nodded quickly. Yes, of course. I'm very sorry, ma'am. I never meant to ruin your lovely painting. Please, allow me to pay for a new canvas and paints. The woman eyed him suspiciously before giving a curt nod. See that you do, and watch where you're stepping next time. With that, she spun on her heel and stalked off. The Vorian's shoulders slumped in relief. Thank you for your help, he said to Ashton. I thought she was going to take a swing at me for a second there. Ashton chuckled. I'm just glad we could resolve things peacefully. Though you might want to be more careful around fountains in the future. Noted, the Vorian said ruefully. He glanced down at his paint-splattered clothes with a grimace. I should probably go get cleaned up. Thanks again. With an awkward wave, he squelched off, leaving a trail of colorful footprints behind him. Ashton turned back to Raylana to find her trying to stifle her laughter behind her hand. Well, that was certainly exciting, she giggled. Just a typical day in the life of a peacekeeper, he joked, taking her hand again. Shall we see if our paint class is a little less eventful? The class was held in an airy, open-sided pavilion, the walls lined with the vibrant creations of previous students. Ashton and Raylana were each given an easel, a palette of paints, and a blank canvas. The jovial Lyraxian instructor explained that they would be painting portraits of each other. The key is to capture the essence of your partner, the instructor said with a wink, their inner beauty and spirit. Don't get too caught up in the superficial details. Ashton and Raylana exchanged amused glances as they took their positions on either side of the easels. Ashton tried to focus on his blank canvas, but his gaze kept straying to Raylana. She had a smudge of blue paint on her cheek, and her brow was adorably furrowed in concentration as she studied him. Ashton loaded his brush with paint and began to work, trying to translate the breathtaking vision before him onto the canvas. Time ceased to exist as he lost himself in the flow of color and shape, the rest of the world narrowing down to the female he was attempting to capture. An indeterminable time later, the instructor called for them to set down their brushes. All right, my budding artists, let's see the masterpieces you've created. Turn your easels around. Now! Ashton and Raylana turned their canvases to face each other. Raylana gasped, her eyes going wide. Oh, Ashton! He had painted her as he saw her, an ethereal being of light and beauty, her hair a waterfall of shimmering white, her eyes pools of molten silver, her smile as radiant as a sun. It wasn't a perfect likeness, but he had managed to capture her inner glow. the gentle kindness and quiet strength that drew him to her like a moth to a flame. "It's how I see you," he said softly. "The real you, beneath the surface." Tears welled in her eyes as she reached out to trace the lines of the painting with a trembling finger. "It's beautiful. No one has ever looked at me like this before." Ashton cupped her face tenderly, uncaring of their audience. "Then they were blind fools. You are the most beautiful person I've ever known, inside and out." A single tear escaped, tracing a shimmering path down her cheek. He caught it with his thumb, brushing it away. Rilana sniffed and gave him a wobbly smile. "Well, I'm afraid my attempt didn't quite do you justice in comparison." She turned her canvas around and Ashton blinked. He tilted his head, trying to make sense of the wild riot of color and shape. It looked like, well, he wasn't entirely sure what it looked like. "It's, very abstract," he offered, fighting to keep a straight face. Rilana burst into laughter, the joyous sound ringing through the pavilion. "It's okay, you can say it. It's terrible." Ashton lost the battle and chuckled. "Well, I wouldn't say terrible, just unique." "Uniquely awful, you mean?" she snorted, setting off another gale of giggles. Soon they were both laughing uncontrollably, leaning on each other for support. The other students and the instructor watched them with amused befuddlement, but Ashton didn't care. All that mattered was the amazing female in his arms and the joy they shared. So what if the day hadn't gone exactly as planned? Life was messy and unpredictable, full of unexpected twists and turns. But if you were lucky enough to find someone to weather those ups and downs with, someone who made you laugh and feel cherished and alive, then the imperfections didn't matter. They only made the journey that much sweeter. As their laughter died down to soft chuckles and hiccups, Ashton pressed his forehead to Rilana's, breathing her in. "Thank you for today," he murmured, "for being you. I can't imagine anyone I would have rather spent it with." "Me either," she whispered back, her eyes shining with happiness and love. "You're my home, Ashton McAllister, my heart, and I'll spend every day trying to make you as happy as you make me." "You already do," he assured her, capturing her lips in a sweet, lingering kiss. "Every single day." The future was uncertain and the path ahead unknown, but wrapped in the arms of his love, her paint-smudged masterpiece a testament to their perfectly imperfect journey, Ashton had never felt more content. Whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together. And that was the greatest adventure of all. Ashton whistled cheerfully as he entered the Peacekeeper Command Center, a bounce in his step and a smile on his face. He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt this happy, this content. The past few weeks with Rilana had been nothing short of magical. They had settled into a comfortable routine, sharing meals and conversation, stealing kisses and gentle touches. Every day, Ashton fell a little more in love with the sweet, funny, compassionate female who had so unexpectedly entered his life. He was so caught up in pleasant thoughts of Rilana that he almost didn't notice the sudden hush that fell over the command center when he walked in. He glanced up, his brow furrowing at the sea of sympathetic and pitying looks being aimed his way. "What's going on?" he asked warily, a sinking feeling in his gut. Jace stepped forward, clapping a hand on Ashton's shoulder. "Ashton, buddy, I think you better come with me. The commander wants to see you in his office, immediately." Ashton's heart started to pound, but he nodded, falling into step beside Jace as they navigated the maze of desks and monitors. His mind raced with possibilities, each more dire than the last. Had something happened to Rilana? Was she hurt? In trouble? By the time they reached Commander Gorg's office, Ashton was wound tighter than a coiled spring. He barely waited for Jace to knock before barging in, his eyes wild. "Commander, what's going—" The words died on his tongue as he caught sight of the two figures seated in front of Gorg's desk. One was a stern-faced Diloxian male in the deep blue uniform of a government official. The other— "Rilana?" Ashton breathed, drinking in the sight of her like a man lost in the desert. She was wearing a simple gray dress, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her eyes were downcast, her shoulders slumped in defeat. At the sound of his voice, her head snapped up, her silver eyes swimming with unshed tears. "Ashton. The Diloxian male cleared his throat pointedly. "Peacekeeper McAllister, I presume. I am Administrator Warland from the Department of Repopulation. I'm afraid there has been a mistake." Ashton tore his gaze away from Rilana to stare at the administrator in confusion. "A mistake? What are you talking about?" Orland shuffled some papers on his lap, not meeting Ashton's eyes. It seems that there was an error in the compatibility testing for the volunteer you know as Rilana. She was not, in fact, a suitable match for you. The algorithm failed to take into account certain incompatibilities between your genetic profiles. Ashton shook his head in denial. That's impossible. Rilana and I are perfect for each other. We're in love. Orland's lips thinned. Be that as it may, the law is clear. Incompatible pairings are to be immediately terminated to avoid any further attachment. As of this moment, Rilana is no longer assigned to you. She will be returned to the volunteer pool and reassigned to a more suitable partner. No! The word burst out of Ashton, fierce and desperate. He lunged forward, intending to go to Rilana, to take her in his arms and never let go. But Jace grabbed him, holding him back. Ashton, don't, Jace warned under his breath. You'll only make it worse. Ashton struggled against Jace's grip, his eyes locked on Rilana's anguished face. You can't do this, he snarled at Orland. You can't just rip us apart like this. What about what Rilana wants? Doesn't she get a say? Orland finally met Ashton's furious gaze, his expression cold and implacable. The volunteers surrendered their autonomy in this matter when they signed up for the program. They knew the risks. Rilana belongs to the state now. Her desires are irrelevant. Rilana made a choke sound, a single tear escaping down her cheek. Ashton's heart shattered at the sight. Please, he begged, not caring how pathetic he sounded. Please don't take her away from me. I love her. I can't lose her. For a moment, Orland's stony facade cracked, a flash of sympathy in his eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. I'm sorry, Peacekeeper McAllister, but the decision has been made. Rilana will be leaving with me. Immediately. He stood, gesturing for Rilana to do the same. She rose on shaky legs, her gaze still locked on Ashton. I love you, she whispered brokenly. I will always love you. Then Orland was ushering her out of the office, his hand clamped around her upper arm like a shackle. Ashton cried out her name, straining against Jace's hold, but it was no use. In a matter of seconds, she was gone. Ashton collapsed to his knees, a howl of anguish ripping from his throat. He felt Jace's arms come around him, trying to offer comfort, but he shrugged him off. He didn't want comfort. He wanted Rilana. Commander Gorg cleared his throat awkwardly. McAllister, Ashton, I'm so sorry, son. I know how much she meant to you. But Orland is right. There's nothing we can do. The law is the law. And our Ashton lifted his head, his eyes burning with unshed tears and determination. Fuck the law, he snarled. I'm not giving up on her. I'm not giving up on us. I'll find a way to get her back, to prove that we belong together. No matter what it takes. Gorg and Jace exchanged worried glances, but Ashton ignored them, surging to his feet. His mind was already racing, formulating plans and strategies. He would need to be smart about this, to navigate the bureaucracy and red tape carefully, but he would do it. For Rilana, he would do anything. He stormed out of the office, ignoring the calls of his commander and friend, as he had work to do. As he marched through the command center, ignoring the pitying stares and whispers, a memory flashed through his mind. Rilana smiling up at him as they picnicked in the botanical gardens, the sunlight dancing in her hair. You're my home, Ashton McAllister, she had whispered. My heart. And you're mine, he whispered back fiercely, even though she was no longer there to hear it. I will find you, Rilana. I will bring you home. I swear it. He had thought he understood love before, thought he knew what it meant to care for someone, but he had been wrong. What he felt for Rilana, it was soul deep, unshakable, eternal. She was a part of him now, as vital as the blood in his veins and the breath in his lungs, and he would move heaven and earth to get her back, to keep her by his side where she belonged. The Delaxian bureaucrats didn't stand a chance, not against the unbreakable bond he and Rilana shared. Hold on, my love, he murmured as he exited the command center into the bright alien sunlight. I'm coming for you, and I won't stop until you're back in my arms where you belong. I promise. He had a government to take on and a love to fight for, and Ashton McAllister never backed down from a fight, especially not when the stakes were this high. Rilana, I'm coming, he thought fiercely as he activated the engine on his hoverbike. Wait for me. Then he was off, racing through the city streets, like a man possessed, his heart leading the way. Back to her, always back to her. No matter what obstacles stood in their way, no matter how long it took, he would find his way back to Rilana. And when he did, he was never letting her go again. Ashton rubbed his burning eyes, the holographic legal text blurring before him. He had been poring over Delaxian law books for days, searching desperately for any loophole or precedent that could help him get Rilana back. But the more he read, the more hopeless he felt. The Delaxian legal system was a labyrinth of archaic rules and ironclad regulations, designed to protect the interests of the state above all else, including the happiness of two hearts that beat as one. A chime sounded, startling Ashton out of his despondent thoughts. He glanced up to see an incoming communication on his holopad. His heart leaped. Could it be news about Rilana? But the flicker of hope died as quickly as it had ignited when he saw the sender. Grimacing, he accepted the call. The screen shimmered and then coalesced into the craggy blue face of Tylox Orzen, the most notorious defense attorney on the planet. Ashton had reached out to him in desperation a few days ago, despite the Diloxian's reputation as a ruthless, unscrupulous shark. "Peacekeeper McAllister," Orzan greeted, his voice as oily as his slick back hair. "I believe I may have found a solution to your little predicament." Ashton shot upright, his heart pounding. "You have? What is it?" Orzan steepled his long blue fingers, his black eyes glittering. "It seems that your Rylana's reassignment may not have been as above board as Administrator Werlin would have us believe. I did some digging into her file and found some interesting discrepancies." "What kind of discrepancies?" Ashton demanded. "The kind that suggest her compatibility tests and results may have been altered deliberately." Ashton gaped at the lawyer, his mind reeling. "Altered? But why? Who would do that?" Orzan shrugged. "Could be any number of reasons. A bribe from a high-ranking official who wanted her for himself, a glitch in the system, or maybe Werlin just didn't like the idea of a Diloxian female shacking up with a human. Who can say?" Ashton's hands clenched into fists, rage boiling in his gut at the thought of someone purposely keeping him and Rilana apart. "Can you prove it? The tampering?" Orzan's thin lips curved in a smug smile. "Oh, I can do better than that, my boy. I can exploit it. You see, the Diloxian Genetic Integrity Act clearly states that any falsification of compatibility results renders the entire matching process null and void, meaning Rylana's reassignment was illegal," Ashton breathed, hope surging through him like a wildfire. "She should never have been taken from me in the first place." "Precisely. I've already filed a petition with the Repopulation Council to have the reassignment overturned. I expect they'll be eager to avoid a very public, very messy scandal, especially with a peacekeeper involved. They'll likely agree to release Rylana back into your custody quietly." Ashton's head was spinning, his heart pounding with a dizzying mix of relief, joy, and lingering fury. He wanted to whoop with elation and put his fist through a wall at the same time. "How long?" he asked hoarsely. "How long until I can have her back?" Orzan waved a dismissive hand. "A few days, a week at most, to push the paperwork through. A bureaucracy, you understand. In the meantime, I suggest you sit tight and try not to do anything rash. The last thing we need is you storming the Repopulation Center, guns blazing." Ashton's jaw clenched at the condescending tone, but he nodded curtly. As much as it galled him, Orzan was right. He couldn't risk jeopardizing Rilana's freedom with hot-headed heroics. "Fine," he bit out. "I'll wait. But the second that paperwork goes through, you'll be the first to know," Orzan assured him. "Trust me, McAllister. This is what I do. By this time next week, your lovely Rylana will be back in your arms where she belongs." "You have my word." Ashton's eyes narrowed. He didn't trust the wily old lawyer as far as he could throw him. But right now, Orzan was his best, his only shot at getting Rilana back. He'd deal with the devil himself if that's what it took. "I'm holding you to that, counselor," Ashton said quietly. "Don't make me regret putting my faith in you." Something like respect flickered in Orzan's obsidian gaze. "Understood, peacekeeper. I'll be in touch." The screen went dark and Ashton slumped back in his chair, suddenly exhausted down to his bones. The past week had been a waking nightmare. Every moment without Rilana, a fresh agony. But now, finally, he had a glimmer of hope. "Hold on, baby," he thought fiercely, picturing her sweet face, her shining eyes. I'm almost there. We're almost there. Just a little longer, and then I'll never let you go again." He had no idea how he was going to survive the next few days. The waiting, the not knowing, the being so close and yet so far from his heart's desire. It would be a special kind of torture, uniquely designed for him. But he would endure it. For her, for their love, he would walk through fire and brimstone. A few days of agonizing limbo was nothing in comparison. Groaning, Ashton pushed to his feet, his muscles screaming in protest after so many hours hunched over his desk. He needed to move, to work off some of the restless energy buzzing beneath his skin. Maybe a few hours in the combat simulator, shooting holographic enemies would help take the edge off. And then, once he was done reducing virtual foes to smoldering pixels, he'd come home and wait for Orzen's call. Wait for the news that would change his life, would remake his world. Wait for her. It was going to be the longest week of his life, but it would all be worth it in the end. When he finally had Rylana back in his arms, where she belonged, where she would stay forever and always, no matter what the universe threw at them. This time, he wouldn't let anything or anyone tear them apart. This time, he would hold on with both hands and never ever let go. "Hang on, sweetheart," he projected across, the light years separating them. I'm coming to bring you home." And then, at long last, their new life could begin. Together, the way it was always meant to be. Ashton was vibrating with impatience and anticipation as he paced the length of his living room, his booted feet wearing a groove in the plush carpet. It had been 6 days since Orzen's call. 6 days of pure, undiluted hell. He had tried to keep busy, throwing himself into his work with a manic intensity that had his fellow peacekeepers eyeing him with concern. But no matter how many extra shifts he took, how many hours he spent in the training room honing his already lethal skills, he couldn't escape the yawning emptiness inside him, the Rylana-shaped hole in his heart. He knew his friends were worried about him. Jace and the others had tried to distract him, dragging him out for drinks and male bonding. But all Ashton could think about was Rylana, her smile, her laugh, the way she felt in his arms. Everything else was just white noise, static on the periphery of his consciousness. He had never known a longing like this, never felt so incomplete, so adrift. It was as if a vital part of him had been ripped away, leaving him bleeding and broken. Only she could make him whole again. Only she could heal the ravaged wasteland of his soul. The door chime sounded and Ashton froze, his heart slamming against his ribs. Could it be? He lunged for the door, his hands shaking as he slapped the release panel. The door slid open, and he sagged in disappointment as he registered Orzen's smug face. "Well, you look like something the Gorgax dragged in," the lawyer observed, breezing past Ashton into the apartment as if he owned it. "I trust you haven't done anything foolish in my absence?" Ashton gritted his teeth, reining in the urge to throttle the infuriating Delaxian. "Just tell me you have good news, counselor. Tell me it worked." Orzen plopped down on the couch, making himself at home. "It worked," he confirmed with a self-satisfied grin. "The Repopulation Council has officially overturned Rylana's reassignment. As of this moment, she is no longer a ward of the state. She's free." Ashton's knees buckled and he caught himself on the edge of the couch, his head swimming. She's free. Just like that?" Orzen snorted. "Hardly just like that. I had to call in every favor and twist every arm on the council to make this happen. You owe me, McAllister. Big time." Ashton barely heard him over the roaring in his ears. Rylana was free to come back to him, to build a life with him. It was everything he had hoped and prayed for. "Where is she?" he demanded, already moving towards the door. "I need to go to her. I need to see her." "That won't be necessary," Orzen said, examining his nails. "I took the liberty of informing Rylana of the good news myself. She should be arriving here any minute to collect her things. And to see you, of course." Ashton gaped at him, his heart soaring and plummeting at the same time. Rylana was coming here? Now? He was in no way prepared. The apartment was a mess. He was a mess. He needed to clean up, to make everything perfect for her homecoming. Orzen, perhaps sensing his rising panic, rolled to his feet. "And that's my cue to leave. I believe I've more than fulfilled my end of the bargain. The rest is up to you two lovebirds." He clapped Ashton on the shoulder as he passed. "A word of advice, McAllister. Don't screw this up. Second chances like this don't come around often. Make it count. Then he was gone, leaving Ashton alone with his racing thoughts and galloping heart. Okay, don't panic, he told himself, running a hand through his hair and wincing when his fingers snagged on snarls and tangles. First things first, shower, shave, make himself presentable for his lady love. He blurred through his ablutions in record time, his stomach churning with nerves and anticipation. He had just finished pulling on a clean shirt when he heard it. 3 soft knocks on the door, the same way she had knocked that very first day, the day that had changed his life forever. His heart in his throat, Ashton crossed to the door and with a trembling hand, released the lock. The door whooshed open and there she was. His R'hllana, his love, his heart, his home. She was even more beautiful than he remembered, her white hair tumbling around her shoulders, her silver eyes luminous and shining with unshed tears. She was wearing the same gray dress she had worn when she was taken from him, and it made his heart clench. "Ashton," she breathed, her voice trembling on his name. "Oh, Ashton." He couldn't speak past the lump in his throat, his own eyes burning with emotion. He simply opened his arms, and then she was flying into them, her slim body colliding with his with enough force to rock him back on his heels. He banded his arms around her, crushing her to his chest as he buried his face in her hair, breathing in the sweet, familiar scent of her. She was shaking against him, her tears soaking into his shirt, and he just held her tighter, murmuring broken endearments into her ear. "I've got you," he rasped, his own voice thick and unsteady. "I've got you, baby. I'm never letting you go again. Never." She lifted her head from his chest, her tear-streaked face tilted up to his. "I was so scared," she whispered, her fingers clutching at his shoulders. "I thought I'd never see you again, and I thought I'd lost you forever." He cupped her face in his palms, his thumbs tenderly wiping away her tears. "Never," he vowed fiercely. "You will never lose me, R'hllana. I will always find my way back to you, no matter what, I promise." A wobbly smile curved her lips, her eyes shining with love and relief. "I'm holding you to that, Ashton McAllister. You're stuck with me now, for better or worse." He grinned at her, feeling lighter than he had in days. "I wouldn't have it any other way." Then he was kissing her, his mouth slanting over hers with all the pent-up passion and desperation of their time apart. She met him with equal fervor, her arms twining around his neck as she opened for him, welcoming him home. He poured every ounce of love, every shred of devotion into that kiss, branding her with the force of his need, his unending desire. She was his and he was hers, and now and forever. Nothing and no one would ever part them again. When they finally broke apart, they were both panting, their chests heaving with the force of their emotions. Ashton rested his forehead against hers, just drinking in the miracle of her presence, the wonder of her touch. "I love you," he told her, the words ripped from the deepest part of his soul. "I love you so much, R'hllana. You are my everything." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but her smile was blinding in its brilliance. "I love you too, Ashton, more than I ever thought possible. You are my heart, my home, my forever." He kissed her again, soft and sweet, a promise of all the kisses to come. Then he scooped her into his arms, relishing her squeal of surprise and delight. "Welcome home, sweetheart," he murmured against her smiling lips as he carried her over the threshold into their apartment, into their future. "Welcome home." The door slid shut behind them with a soft snick, cocooning them in their own little world. A world where nothing existed but their love, their joy, their unshakable bond. They had fought for this, bled for this, had almost lost everything in the battle to be together. But they had prevailed, their love proving stronger than any force in the universe. And now at long last they could begin their happily ever after, together, forever, just as the stars had always intended. It was going to be one hell of a ride, but Ashton knew with R'hllana by his side, he was ready for anything. "Bring it on, universe," he thought as he lowered his smiling mate to their bed. "We'll face it all, hand in hand, heart to heart." That was, after all, the Ashton and R'hllana way.